The radio crackled with desperate urgency as Sergeant Dominic Fletcher's voice cut through the mountain static, calling for extraction that would never come. 12 Rangers were surrounded, ammunition running low, and the enemy closing in from all sides. What happened next would become the most legendary rescue mission in modern military aviation history, and the pilot who answered that final transmission was someone the Brants had written off as unfit to fly. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The desert heat shimmered off the tarmac at Bagram Airfield as Captain Leila Vance stepped off the transport plane, her flight bag slung over one shoulder and a worn leather jacket draped across the other. The jacket had belonged to her father, Colonel Graham Vance, and it still carried the faint scent of aviation fuel and old leather that she associated with home. She adjusted her aviator sunglasses against the Afghan sun and surveyed the sprawling military installation that would be her new assignment for the next 6 months. Leila had flown 8,000 miles from Fort Campbell, carrying with her a reputation that preceded her arrival like a shadow. The other pilots knew her call sign before they knew her face: Shadow. Some said it was because of her ability to appear out of nowhere during training exercises. Others whispered it was because she was a ghost of her father's legacy, forever flying in the shadow of a man who had become a legend in military aviation circles. The truth was more complicated than either explanation suggested. As she approached the operations building, Leila couldn't shake the familiar knot of anxiety that had accompanied every new assignment since her father's death 18 months ago. Colonel Graham Vance had been more than a decorated combat pilot. He had been an innovator who developed unconventional tactics that saved countless lives during his 30 decades of service. His techniques for low-altitude combat insertions in hostile terrain had become standard doctrine, though few people remembered where those methods originated. He had also been the one person who truly believed Leila belonged in a cockpit. The guard at the operations entrance checked her credentials with professional efficiency, but his expression shifted slightly when he read her name. Captain Vance. Any relation to Colonel Graham Vance? My father, Leila replied simply, bracing herself for what usually came next. Heard he was one of the best. The guard's tone was respectful but carried an unspoken question that Leila had heard 1,000 times before. Are you as good as he was? She nodded her thanks and moved past him into the air-conditioned interior of the building. The operations center buzzed with controlled chaos as personnel coordinated missions across the region. Leila reported to the Aviation Unit Commander's office, where Major Clifford Ramsey waited with her assignment paperwork spread across his desk. Major Ramsey was a career officer in his late 40s, with the weathered appearance of someone who had spent too many years in combat zones. His office walls displayed photographs from various deployments, commendations, and a prominent picture of an Apache helicopter silhouetted against a sunset. He looked up as Leila entered, and his expression was carefully neutral. Captain Vance, welcome to Bagram. His handshake was firm but brief. I've reviewed your file. Impressive flight hours for someone of your age. Top marks in advanced combat tactics training. Qualified on multiple airframes. Thank you, sir. Your father trained here, you know, back in 2005, before the surge. I was a young warrant officer then, learning the ropes. Graham Vance was a hell of a pilot. His low-altitude insertion techniques saved my unit more than once. Leila settled into the chair across from his desk, recognizing the pattern of the conversation. Every commander started this way, praising her father before getting to the inevitable concerns about her own capabilities. That being said, Ramsey continued, his tone shifting subtly, I need to be direct with you, Captain. This is a combat zone with zero margin for error. The missions we fly here require absolute precision, split-second decision-making, and the ability to operate under conditions that would ground most pilots. I understand, sir. Do you? Ramsey leaned forward slightly. Because I've also reviewed the incident report from your last deployment, the unauthorized flight that resulted in your temporary grounding. There it was, the shadow that followed Leila more persistently than any call sign. 6 months ago, she had violated direct orders by flying a medical evacuation mission during a sandstorm that had grounded all other aircraft. The mission had been successful. She had extracted 3 critically wounded soldiers who would have died without immediate evacuation. But success didn't erase the fact that she had disobeyed a direct order from her commanding officer. I made a judgment call based on the tactical situation, sir. 3 soldiers needed immediate extraction, and I had the skills to fly in those conditions. Your judgment nearly got you court-martialed, Ramsey said flatly. The only reason you're still flying is because those 3 soldiers survived and because your father's friends in high places intervened on your behalf. The accusation stung, partly because there was truth in it. Leila had received calls from senior officers who had served with her father, offering support and pulling strings to keep her career intact. She had wanted to refuse their help, to face the consequences of her actions on her own merits. But she also knew that being grounded meant losing the one thing that connected her to her father's memory. I'm grateful for the opportunity to continue serving, sir. Grateful. Ramsey repeated the word as if testing its weight. Here's how this is going to work, Captain. You'll be assigned to routine logistics flights, supply runs, personnel transport, non-combat operations. You will fly when and where I authorize, and you will not deviate from approved flight plans or take unauthorized risks. Is that clear? Perfectly clear, sir. Your father may have been a maverick who got away with bending rules because his instincts were usually right. But this isn't his war anymore, and I can't afford pilots who think regulations don't apply to them. Ramsey's expression softened slightly. I'm not trying to clip your wings, Vance. I'm trying to keep you alive and keep this unit operational. Can you work within those parameters? Leila met his gaze steadily. Yes, sir. Good. Report to Chief Warrant Officer Drake for your aircraft assignment and flight schedule. Dismissed. As Leila left the office, she felt the familiar frustration building in her chest. She had come to Afghanistan hoping to prove herself on her own merits, to step out of her father's shadow and establish her own reputation. Instead, she was being assigned to routine logistics missions while her skills atrophied behind the controls of cargo runs. The reality was harsh but undeniable. In the eyes of commanders like Ramsey, she would always be Graham Vance's daughter first and a pilot second. Her unauthorized flight during the sandstorm had only reinforced their perception that she was reckless, trading on her father's reputation while lacking his judgment. What they didn't know was that the techniques she had used during that medical evacuation weren't just instinct. They were methods her father had taught her during countless hours of training, techniques he had developed but never published in official manuals because they required a level of skill and situational awareness that couldn't be standardized. Hidden in Leila's flight bag was a journal her father had given her 2 weeks before his fatal mission. It contained decades of notes on advanced combat flying tactics, observations from missions that remained classified, and innovations that pushed the boundaries of what conventional doctrine considered possible. The journal's final entry was dated the day before his fatal mission. Leila, he had written, true pilots don't fly by the book. They fly by understanding the physics of flight so completely that the aircraft becomes an extension of their instincts. When the moment comes that requires you to choose between following orders and saving lives, trust your training. Trust yourself. Some rules exist to be broken by people skilled enough to know when breaking them is the right call. She had read those words 100 times, finding both comfort and burden in them. Her father had known this day would come, had prepared her for the moment when she would have to prove that his faith in her abilities was justified. But first, she had to survive the suffocating restrictions of an assignment designed to keep her safely grounded in all but the most literal sense. As Leila walked across the airfield toward the aviation unit's hangar, she couldn't know that in 72 hours, a desperate radio transmission would give her the chance to prove that some legacies were earned through action, not inheritance. The first week at Bagram felt like being trapped in a cage made of protocol and suspicion. Every morning, Leila woke at 0500 hours in her cramped quarters, pulled on her flight suit, and reported to the aviation unit ready room where mission assignments were posted. And every morning, her name appeared next to the same mundane tasks: supply runs to forward operating bases, personnel transport between secure facilities, and routine patrol flights over established safe corridors. The other pilots were professional, but distant. They greeted her with polite nods and minimal conversation, then clustered together discussing combat missions and close air support operations, from which she was conspicuously excluded. Leila recognized the pattern. She was being evaluated, tested, kept at arm's length until she proved herself worthy of their trust. In the ready room, conversations quieted when she entered. She caught fragments of whispered discussions that ended abruptly as she passed. "That's Graham Vance's daughter. Heard she got grounded for going rogue on her last deployment. Ramsey's keeping her on a short leash." The isolation was suffocating, but familiar. She had faced similar treatment at every assignment since her father's death. Chief Warrant Officer Fiona Drake ran the aviation maintenance operations with ruthless efficiency. She was a 20-year veteran with short-cropped gray hair and the nonsense demeanor of someone who had seen too many pilots make fatal mistakes. When Leila reported for her aircraft assignment, Drake's assessment was brutally direct. "You'll be flying UH-60 logistics configurations," Drake announced, leading Leila through the hangar where rows of helicopters sat in various states of maintenance. Standard cargo and passenger transport. Nothing fancy, nothing heroic. Just reliable flying that gets people and equipment where they need to go. "Understood, Chief." Drake stopped beside a Black Hawk that had seen better days. The aircraft's exterior was weathered and scarred from years of service, with patches of primer showing where repairs had been made. "This'll be your bird. Call sign Angel 7. She's not pretty, but she's mechanically sound, and she'll get you home if you treat her right." Leila circled the aircraft, conducting a visual inspection with practiced efficiency. Despite its worn appearance, she could see that the maintenance was meticulous. Every critical system showed signs of careful attention and regular service. "She's been here longer than most of the pilots. Previous crew rotated home last month. The bird's got a solid maintenance record, no major incidents. Perfect for routine operations." "She looks reliable," she said diplomatically, recognizing that this assignment was another message from Major Ramsey. She would fly the least glamorous missions in the least impressive aircraft, kept safely away from any situation that might allow her to prove her actual capabilities. Drake studied her for a moment, her expression unreadable. "Your father flew a bird just like this one on his first deployment here, before he moved up to more advanced airframes. He understood that every aircraft has its role, and every mission matters, whether it's delivering ammunition or extracting wounded." The observation caught Leila off guard. "You knew my father?" "Served with him briefly in 2005. I was crew chief on his bird for 3 months. Drake's weathered face softened slightly. "Graham Vance was the best pilot I ever worked with, and I've worked with hundreds. He had an instinct for flying that went beyond training or experience. When everyone else saw limitations, he saw possibilities." Leila felt a tightness in her chest. Every mention of her father brought the loss back with renewed intensity. "Did he ever talk about his family?" "Not much. Operational security was everything to him. But I remember one conversation after a particularly difficult mission. He mentioned having a daughter who wanted to fly. Said he was teaching her everything he knew because someday she'd be better than him. That was you, wasn't it?" "Yes, Chief."
Then why are you letting Major Ramsey's restrictions define what you're capable of? The question was direct and challenging. "I've seen your flight records. You're qualified on 8 different airframes, certified for combat operations, and you've logged more flight hours in hostile environments than pilots twice your age. So why are you accepting logistics assignments like you're a rookie fresh out of flight school?" "Because I don't have a choice, Chief. I'm here under restricted conditions because of my last deployment. One more violation, and I'll be permanently grounded." Drake snorted dismissively. Graham Vance's daughter, afraid of violating regulations? That doesn't sound like the pilot who flew a medical evacuation through a sandstorm that grounded everyone else. That pilot understood that sometimes the right thing to do isn't the authorized thing to do. That pilot nearly lost her career, Chief. But she saved 3 lives. Drake's tone became more serious. Look, I'm not telling you to disobey orders or take stupid risks. I'm telling you to be ready when the moment comes that requires you to be more than what they expect. Your father's legacy isn't about following rules or staying safe. It's about having the skills and courage to do what needs to be done when lives are on the line. The conversation was interrupted by Lieutenant Jade Hoffman, the operations officer who coordinated mission assignments. She approached with a tablet displaying flight schedules. Captain Vance, you're scheduled for a supply run to FOB Granite Shield tomorrow at 0800. Standard cargo load, established flight corridor. Expected duration, 4 hours round trip. Understood, Lieutenant. Hoffman hesitated, then lowered her voice. Just so you know, some of the other pilots are taking bets on how long you'll last here before requesting a transfer. They think you'll get bored with logistics missions and ask to be reassigned somewhere you can fly more interesting operations. What do you think, Lieutenant? I think you're Graham Vance's daughter, which means you're either going to prove you inherited his talent or prove you're just trading on his name. Either way, we'll find out soon enough. As Hoffman walked away, Leila felt the weight of expectation pressing down like a physical force. Everyone was watching, waiting to see if she would succeed or fail, if she would honor her father's legacy or prove that bloodlines meant nothing without actual ability. That evening, alone in her quarters, Leila opened her father's journal and read through his notes on unconventional flight tactics. The techniques he described pushed the boundaries of what standard training considered possible. Low-altitude insertions in zero-visibility conditions, emergency extractions from hot landing zones with minimal approach time, navigation through terrain that conventional doctrine deemed too dangerous for helicopter operations. Her father had developed these methods through decades of experience and an intuitive understanding of flight dynamics that went beyond textbook knowledge. He had never published them in official manuals because they couldn't be safely taught to pilots who lacked his level of skill and judgment. But he had taught them to Leila, spending countless hours drilling her on scenarios that would never appear in standard training curricula. When the impossible mission comes, he had told her during one of their final training sessions, everyone else will see reasons why it can't be done. You need to see the one way it can be done. That's what separates adequate pilots from the ones who save lives when it matters most. Leila closed the journal and stared at the worn leather cover. Somewhere out there in the Afghan mountains, a situation was developing that would require exactly the kind of flying her father had prepared her for. She could feel it approaching like a storm on the horizon, inevitable and terrifying. The question wasn't whether she had the skills to respond when that moment came. The question was whether she would have the courage to risk everything she had left to honor the legacy her father had entrusted her to.
The discovery came on Leila's 5th day at Bagram, during a routine maintenance inspection of Angel 7. She had arrived at the hangar early, preferring the quiet hours before dawn when she could familiarize herself with the aircraft without the scrutiny of other pilots. The Black Hawk sat in the dim hangar lighting, and Leila moved through her pre-flight checks with methodical precision. As she inspected the cargo area, her flashlight caught something unusual. Behind one of the crew seats, partially hidden by a storage compartment, someone had etched initials into the metal frame. The letters were small and worn, barely visible after years of service and countless missions, but they were unmistakable. GV 2005. Graham Vance. Her father. Leila ran her fingers over the etched letters, feeling the grooves worn smooth by time. This had been his aircraft during his deployment to Bagram. The same helicopter that Chief Drake had mentioned, the one her father had flown before moving to more advanced airframes. She was literally sitting in the cockpit where he had sat, following the same flight paths he had flown nearly 20 years ago. The realization hit her with unexpected force. This assignment wasn't just random chance or bureaucratic coincidence. Someone had deliberately assigned her to her father's old aircraft. But who and why? I wondered when you'd find those. Layla spun around to find Captain Bryce Holloway leaning against the hangar entrance. He was a veteran pilot in his late 30s, one of the few who had shown any friendliness toward her since her arrival. His easy manner and quiet competence had earned him respect throughout the aviation unit. "You knew this was my father's bird?" Layla asked. Holloway walked closer, his boots echoing on the concrete floor. "I did. Because I'm the one who suggested Drake assign it to you. Figured you'd find the initials eventually and start asking questions." "Why would you do that?" "Because I served with your father during his last deployment here, 3 years ago before his final mission." Holloway's expression grew serious. "Graham Vance saved my life and the lives of my entire crew during an extraction that went sideways. He flew through conditions that should have been impossible. Pulled us out of a hot zone when every other pilot had been ordered to stand down." Layla felt her pulse quicken. Her father's final deployment had been classified, details of his missions kept from family members under operational security protocols. She had spent 18 months trying to piece together what had happened, filing requests for information that were consistently denied or heavily redacted. "I didn't know he was here 3 years ago. The records are sealed." "Most of them are. Because he was testing new tactics that the brass didn't want publicized. Low-altitude insertion methods in extreme terrain, night operations without standard navigational aids, emergency extractions from zones that conventional doctrine said were too dangerous for helicopter operations." "The techniques in his journal," Layla said quietly, understanding dawning. "He was field testing them." "And they worked. Graham developed methods that saved dozens of lives during that deployment. But he also made enemies among officers who believed he was taking unnecessary risks and encouraging dangerous behavior in other pilots." Holloway paused. "Major Ramsey was one of those officers. He and your father had several confrontations about operational protocols and acceptable risk levels." The pieces were starting to fit together. Ramsey's hostility toward Layla wasn't just about her unauthorized flight during the sandstorm. It was about her father and the lingering resentment from conflicts that had never been resolved. "Ramsey thinks I'm like him, reckless, willing to break rules because I think regulations don't apply to me." "Are you?" Holloway asked bluntly. The question deserved an honest answer. "I think regulations exist for good reasons, but they're written for average situations and average pilots. My father taught me that exceptional circumstances sometimes require exceptional responses. The key is knowing the difference." Holloway nodded slowly. "That's exactly what Graham used to say. The problem is that most pilots who think they're exceptional are just reckless. Your father was genuinely exceptional, but proving that required demonstrating it consistently under pressure." "Is that why you assigned me his aircraft? To see if I can live up to his reputation?" "Partly, but also because I think you might need what he left behind." Holloway reached into his jacket and pulled out a small package wrapped in weathered cloth. "Your father gave this to me before his final mission. Made me promise to give it to you if anything happened to him and if you ever ended up flying from Bagram." Layla took the package with trembling hands. Inside the cloth was a data card, the kind used for flight computer systems, and a handwritten note in her father's distinctive script. "Layla, if you're reading this, then you've found your way to Bagram and to my old bird. Good. Everything you need to know is on this card. Flight data from missions that worked, approaches that succeeded when they shouldn't have, and terrain mapping for areas where standard navigation fails. Study it. Learn from it. But more importantly, understand why these techniques work. It's not about being brave or taking risks. It's about understanding the physics of flight so completely that you can see possibilities others miss. When the impossible mission comes, and it will come, trust your training and trust yourself. You're ready for this, even if you don't believe it yet. Your loving father, Graham." Layla read the note 3 times, her vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall. Her father had known she would end up here, had prepared for this exact moment, had left her the tools she would need to face whatever challenges lay ahead. "What's on the data card?" she asked Holloway. "I don't know. Your father encrypted it, said only you would be able to access the files because they're keyed to biometric data that matches your flight certification credentials." Holloway studied her carefully. "But I can guess. Graham spent his last deployment documenting every unconventional approach he developed. Terrain mapping for mountain flying that goes beyond what standard systems provide, weather analysis protocols for operating in conditions that ground other pilots, and emergency procedures for situations that aren't in any manual. Why didn't he publish this officially, share it with other pilots? Because the military doesn't adopt new tactics based on one pilot's innovations, no matter how successful. Changes to doctrine require extensive testing, committee review, and bureaucratic approval that takes years. Your father knew he didn't have years. So he documented everything for the one person he trusted to carry his work forward." Leila carefully secured the data card and note in her flight suit pocket. The weight was negligible, but the responsibility felt enormous. Her father had spent the final months of his life preparing this gift, trusting that she would have the skill and courage to use it when the moment came. "Thank you for keeping his promise," she said to Holloway. "Don't thank me yet. What's on that card is going to put you in a difficult position. If you use those techniques and something goes wrong, Ramsey will have all the justification he needs to ground you permanently. But if you don't use them when they're needed, people might die who could have been saved. How do I know when that moment comes?" Holloway's expression was grim. "You'll know. And when it does, you'll have to make the same choice your father made. Follow the safe path that keeps your career intact. Or do what needs to be done regardless of the consequences." As Holloway walked away, leaving Leila alone with her father's final gift, she felt the weight of legacy pressing down with renewed intensity. The data card in her pocket contained more than flight information. It contained her father's last testament, his belief that she was capable of achievements that others would consider impossible. The question was whether she had the courage to prove him right.
3 days after discovering her father's data card, Leila was summoned to an emergency briefing at 0300 hours. She arrived at the operations center to find it packed with personnel, the tension in the room palpable even before anyone spoke. Major Ramsey stood at the front beside a large tactical display showing mountainous terrain in Kandahar province. "Listen up," Ramsey began, his voice cutting through the low murmur of conversation. "At 22:47 hours last night, Ranger Team Viper was inserted into the Tangi Valley for a high-value target capture operation. The mission went sideways when they encountered a larger enemy force than intelligence predicted. The team is now pinned down in a box canyon with limited ammunition and multiple casualties." The tactical display zoomed in on a narrow valley surrounded by steep mountain ridges. Red markers indicated enemy positions on the high ground, effectively surrounding a small blue marker representing the Ranger team's location. Team leader is Sergeant First Class Dominic Fletcher, call sign Grizzly. His last transmission indicated 12 Rangers, 3 critically wounded, ammunition at 20%, and enemy forces closing from 3 sides. Ramsey's expression was grim. "They've requested immediate extraction, but there's a problem." Lieutenant Jade Hoffman stepped forward, pulling up weather data on a secondary screen. "A dust storm moved into the valley 2 hours ago. Visibility is near zero, winds gusting to 45 knots, with severe turbulence reported by reconnaissance drones before they were forced to return to base. Current conditions exceed safe flight parameters for helicopter operations." Leila felt her stomach tighten. She knew where this briefing was heading. "Our standard extraction protocols require minimum visibility of 1 mile and wind speeds below 30 knots. Current conditions don't meet either threshold. I've contacted Regional Command, and they've ordered us to wait for the weather to clear before attempting extraction." "How long until conditions improve?" asked Captain Andre Sullivan, one of the senior pilots. "Meteorology estimates 4 to 6 hours minimum, possibly longer." A heavy silence fell over the room as everyone processed the implications. 4 to 6 hours was an eternity for a surrounded unit running out of ammunition. The Rangers wouldn't last that long. "Sir," said Chief Warrant Officer Drake, her voice tight with controlled anger, "those men won't survive 4 hours. We need to get birds in the air now." "I'm aware of the tactical situation, Chief, but I'm not authorizing pilots to fly suicide missions into conditions that violate every safety protocol we have. We wait for the weather to break, then we extract whoever's left." The callousness of the statement hung in the air like poison. Ramsey was essentially writing off the Ranger team, accepting their deaths as preferable to risking aviation assets in dangerous conditions. Leila's hand moved unconsciously to her flight suit pocket, feeling the outline of her father's data card. On that card were terrain maps of the Tangi Valley that went far beyond standard navigation systems, weather analysis protocols for operating in extreme conditions, emergency extraction procedures that her father had developed and proven during his final deployment. She thought about the note he had written. "When the impossible mission comes, and it will come, trust your training and trust yourself." This was that moment. "Sir, request permission to speak," Leila said, her voice cutting through the tension in the room. Ramsey's eyes locked onto her with immediate suspicion. "Captain Vance, I'm sure you have opinions about this situation, but now is not the time for—" "I can fly the extraction, sir." The room went completely silent. Every eye turned towards Leila, expressions ranging from shock to disbelief. "Excuse me?" Ramsey's tone was dangerous.
I can extract the Ranger team, sir. I have experience flying in extreme weather conditions and terrain that matches the Tangi Valley profile. With proper preparation and the right approach, the mission is feasible." "Feasible?" Ramsey's face was reddening. "Captain, did you not hear the weather briefing? Visibility is 0. Winds are at the maximum limits for helicopter operations, and you're proposing to fly into a box canyon surrounded by enemy forces in the middle of a dust storm?" "Yes, sir, that's exactly what I'm proposing." Ramsey stepped closer, lowering his voice so only the front row could hear clearly. "This is exactly the kind of reckless grandstanding that got you grounded on your last deployment. You think flying one unauthorized medical evacuation makes you qualified to attempt a mission that every experienced pilot in this room knows is impossible? It's not impossible, sir. It's just extremely difficult. There's a difference. The difference is irrelevant because I'm not authorizing this mission." Ramsey turned back to address the full briefing. "We wait for weather clearance. That's final." Captain Holloway stood up from his seat near the back. "Sir, with respect, Captain Vance's record shows extensive low-visibility flight experience. She's qualified on—" "I know what she's qualified on, Captain Holloway. I also know she has a pattern of disregarding orders when she thinks she knows better than her commanding officers. That ends now." Leila felt her pulse pounding in her ears. Every instinct told her this was the moment her father had prepared her for. 12 Rangers were going to die if someone didn't act. She had the skills, the knowledge, and the aircraft to save them. But she also knew that defying Ramsey's direct order would end her career permanently. "Sir," Drake interjected, "I've reviewed Captain Vance's maintenance logs and flight history. Her skills are exceptional, and Angel 7 is mechanically sound for this type of operation. If there's any chance—" "There is no chance, Chief, because I am not approving this mission." Ramsey's control was slipping. "Captain Vance, you are hereby ordered to remain grounded until further notice. If I find out you've so much as approached an aircraft without authorization, I will have you arrested for insubordination. Is that understood?" Leila met his gaze steadily. "Understood, sir." "Good. This briefing is concluded. We'll reconvene when weather conditions improve." As personnel filed out of the operations center, Leila remained seated, her mind racing. Ramsey had given her a direct order to stay grounded. Violating it would mean court-martial, dishonorable discharge, and the end of everything she had worked for. But following that order meant 12 Rangers would die in a canyon where she could reach them. Holloway approached quietly and leaned down to whisper, "Your father faced this exact choice during his last deployment. Different valley, different unit, same impossible conditions. He made his decision, and it saved 17 lives.
but it also created enemies who never forgave him for proving them wrong. What are you saying? I'm saying that some choices define who you are more than any career or rank ever will. Your father understood that. Now you have to decide if you do too. Holloway straightened and walked toward the exit, pausing at the door. Angel 7's pre-flight is complete. Fuel tanks are full. If someone were to fly an unauthorized mission, they'd find everything ready to go. As Holloway disappeared into the night, Leila sat alone in the empty operations center, staring at the tactical display still showing 12 Rangers surrounded and running out of time. Her father's words echoed in her mind. Trust your training and trust yourself. The choice was hers alone to make.
Leila sat in the empty operations center for 20 minutes after everyone left, staring at the tactical display showing the Rangers' position. The red markers indicating enemy forces had moved closer since the briefing began. Time was running out, and with each passing minute, the probability of a successful rescue diminished. She pulled out her father's data card and inserted it into her personal tablet. The biometric authentication recognized her credentials instantly, and files began populating the screen. Terrain maps of the Tangi Valley with resolution far beyond standard military navigation systems. Weather penetration protocols for operating in zero visibility conditions, emergency extraction procedures from confined mountain terrain. Everything she needed was here, documented in meticulous detail from her father's final deployment. He had flown missions just like this one, proven these techniques worked, and left them for her knowing that someday she would face the same impossible choice he had faced. The data included something else. Mission logs from her father's unauthorized extraction 3 years ago, the one that had created enemies among the command structure. Leila read through his notes, seeing the exact same scenario playing out, a unit pinned down in a mountain valley, weather conditions that grounded all aircraft, command ordering pilots to wait for conditions to improve, and her father making the decision to fly anyway, saving 17 lives while ending his career's trajectory toward higher command positions. They called me reckless, he had written in the mission notes, but those 17 soldiers went home to their families. I'd make the same choice every time, regardless of consequences. Some things matter more than career advancement or official approval. Leila closed the tablet and stood, feeling the weight of the decision settling over her. If she followed Ramsey's orders, she would maintain her career and avoid the court-martial that would surely follow disobedience. But 12 Rangers would die, and she would spend the rest of her life knowing she had the skills to save them and chose not to act. If she flew the mission, she would likely be arrested upon return, face military justice proceedings, and be dishonorably discharged regardless of whether the extraction succeeded. Her career would be over. Her father's reputation would be further tarnished by association. Everything she had worked for would be destroyed. But 12 families would have their loved ones come home. The mathematics of the choice were brutally simple. 12 lives versus 1 career. When framed that way, there was really no choice at all. Leila walked out of the operations center into the pre-dawn darkness, her boots crunching on gravel as she crossed toward the aviation hangar. The base was quiet, most personnel either sleeping or manning essential posts. The hangar where Angel 7 waited was dimly lit, the Black Hawk sitting in shadow like a patient sentinel. Chief Drake emerged from the maintenance office as Leila approached. The older woman's expression was carefully neutral, but her presence at this hour wasn't coincidental. Couldn't sleep, Captain? No, Chief. Thought I'd review some pre-flight procedures. Drake nodded slowly. Angel 7 is fully fueled and ready for immediate deployment. All systems checked out during the last maintenance cycle. She's a reliable bird, even in difficult conditions. Thank you, Chief. Captain Vance. Drake's voice became more serious. What you're considering will end your career. You understand that? I do. And you're going to do it anyway. It wasn't a question, but Leila answered. 12 Rangers are going to die if someone doesn't act. I have the skills and the knowledge to reach them. How can I not try?
Drake was quiet for a long moment, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a handheld radio. This is set to the Ranger team's emergency frequency. Last transmission was 19 minutes ago. Sergeant Fletcher reported they're down to their last magazines, and the enemy is preparing for a final assault. He estimated they have maybe 30 minutes before being overrun.
Leila took the radio, hearing faint static mixed with distant voices. Somewhere in those mountains, 12 men were fighting for their lives, waiting for help that command had decided wasn't coming. "If you're going to do this," Drake continued, "you need to leave now. Every minute you wait reduces the chance of success. I can't officially help you, but I can tell you that the duty officer won't be checking the hangar for another hour. What happens in that time is between you and your conscience. You could be court-martialed for this, Chief. I'm 3 months from retirement with 22 years of service. They're not going to touch me over turning a blind eye for 60 minutes. Besides, your father saved my life during a mission in 2005. I owe the Vance family a debt, and I always pay my debts." Leila felt gratitude surge through her. "Thank you, Chief." "Don't thank me. Just bring those Rangers home and try not to get yourself killed in the process. Your father would never forgive me if I let his daughter fly into a mountain." As Drake walked away, Leila moved toward Angel 7 and began her pre-flight inspection with practiced efficiency. Her hands moved automatically through the checks, while her mind processed the tactical situation. The Tungi Valley was a box canyon with steep ridges on 3 sides. Standard approach vectors would be impossible in the dust storm. She would need to use terrain masking to avoid detection, fly below the ridgeline using her father's detailed topographical data, and execute the extraction from a confined landing zone under fire. It was exactly the kind of mission her father had trained her for during countless hours of simulation and practice. He had known this day would come, had prepared her for this exact scenario, and had left her the tools she needed to succeed where conventional tactics would fail. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Leila climbed into the cockpit and began the startup sequence. The familiar vibration of the engines coming to life filled the aircraft, and the instrument panel illuminated with green indicators showing all systems nominal. She loaded her father's terrain data into the navigation computer, overlaying it with real-time weather information and the Ranger's last known position. The radio crackled with Sergeant Fletcher's voice, transmission breaking up through static. "Any station, this is Viper Actual. We are down to final ammunition. Request immediate extraction. Enemy preparing to overrun our position. This is our last transmission." The desperation in his voice cut through Leila like a knife. These weren't abstract tactical markers on a display. They were 12 human beings facing death, men with families and futures that would end in the next 30 minutes if help didn't arrive. Leila's hand moved to the throttle, hovering there as she made her final decision. Once she lifted off, there would be no turning back. She would be in open defiance of a direct order, and regardless of the mission's outcome, her military career would effectively end the moment the wheels left the ground. She thought about her father's final note. "Trust your training and trust yourself. You're ready for this." Leila keyed the radio. "Viper Actual, this is Angel 7. I'm en route to your position. Hold your position and mark your perimeter with IR strobes. Extraction in 20 minutes. Do you copy?" The response came back immediately, Fletcher's voice filled with disbelief and desperate hope. "Angel 7, confirm you're launching? Command said no extraction was possible in these conditions." "Command doesn't know everything, Viper. Keep your heads down. I'm coming to get you." Leila pulled the throttle and lifted Angel 7 into the night sky, leaving behind the safety of orders and regulations, flying instead toward the only thing that mattered, bringing 12 Rangers home alive. The moment Angel 7 cleared the airfield perimeter, Leila felt the full force of the storm hit the aircraft. Wind shear slammed into the Black Hawk from multiple directions simultaneously, causing the helicopter to buck and yaw violently. Visibility dropped to absolute zero as dust particles filled the air like a solid wall, turning her cockpit windows into blank screens of brown-gray nothing. Any conventional pilot would have immediately turned back. The conditions were beyond anything standard training prepared pilots to handle. But Leila wasn't flying conventionally. She switched her primary navigation to the terrain mapping system loaded from her father's data card, overlaying it with instrument readings that showed her position relative to the surrounding mountains. "Angel 7, this is Bagram Tower.
The radio transmission was sharp and angry. "You are not cleared for departure. Return to base immediately, acknowledge." Leila ignored the transmission. She was committed now, and turning back would only waste precious time the Rangers didn't have. Instead, she keyed the radio to the Ranger team's frequency. "Viper Actual, Angel 7 is 15 minutes from your position. What's your current tactical situation?" Fletcher's response came through heavy gunfire in the background. "Angel 7, we've got enemy on 3 sides moving in for final assault. My wounded can't move on their own, and we're down to less than 50 rounds total. I don't know how you're flying in this storm, but you need to hurry." "Copy that, Viper. Keep your IR strobes active and stay low. I'm coming in from the northeast using terrain masking. You won't see or hear me until I'm directly overhead." The approach Leila was planning would have been considered impossible by standard doctrine. The Tungi Valley was surrounded by ridges rising over 3,000 feet above the canyon floor. Flying below those ridges in zero visibility meant trusting instruments and terrain mapping completely, with no margin for error. A single miscalculation would send the helicopter directly into a mountain wall. But her father's data included something standard maps didn't show: micro-terrain features that created natural corridors through the ridgelines. He had documented these paths during his deployment, flying them repeatedly until he knew every outcropping and elevation change by memory. Now Leila was flying those same routes, trusting her father's data the same way she had trusted his teaching. The Black Hawk shuddered through turbulence as she descended to 500 feet above ground level, threading between mountain peaks she couldn't see but knew were there. Her instruments showed the terrain rising steeply on both sides, the corridor narrowing to less than 200 feet of clearance. One gust of wind at the wrong moment could be fatal. "Angel 7, Bagram Tower, Major Ramsey is demanding you return to base immediately. You are ordered to abort this mission." Leila switched off the tower frequency, focusing entirely on the flight. Her hands moved constantly on the controls, making micro-adjustments to compensate for wind shear and turbulence. Everything her father had taught her about flying by instruments, about trusting data over instinct, about maintaining composure under impossible stress, was being tested simultaneously. The terrain map showed she was approaching the valley entrance. The canyon walls would provide some protection from the wind, but they would also create a funnel effect that could flip the helicopter if she entered at the wrong angle. Her father's notes described the precise approach vector: enter from the northeast at 45 degrees, descend rapidly to stay below enemy line of sight, then level out at the canyon floor. "Viper Actual, I'm at the valley entrance. Pop smoke and strobes now." "Roger, Angel 7. Smoke deployed." Through the dust storm, Leila caught a brief flash of infrared strobe lights marking the Ranger position. The landing zone was smaller than she'd hoped, barely large enough for the Black Hawk's rotor dynamometer, surrounded by rocks and with enemy positions elevated on 3 sides. She would be exposed to fire the moment she descended below the ridgeline.
Leila committed to the approach, dropping Angel 7 into the canyon like a stone. The helicopter plummeted 500 feet in seconds, her stomach lurching with the descent. She pulled back hard on the collective at the last moment, the rotors screaming in protest as they arrested the fall mere feet above the ground. Gunfire erupted from the ridgelines immediately. Rounds sparked off the Black Hawk's armored hull as enemy fighters realized an aircraft had somehow appeared through the storm. The Rangers returned fire, their remaining ammunition spent in desperate covering fire as the helicopter settled onto the rocky ground. "Go, go, go!" Leila heard Fletcher shouting over the radio. "Get the wounded loaded first!" Through the dust and chaos, Leila could see shapes moving toward the aircraft. Rangers were carrying wounded men, dragging them when necessary, pushing through enemy fire to reach the helicopter. She kept the rotors at full power, ready to lift off the instant everyone was aboard. A rocket-propelled grenade streaked through the dust storm, missing Angel 7's tail rotor by less than 10 feet. The explosion showered the helicopter with rock fragments, and warning indicators lit up on the instrument panel, showing minor damage to the tail assembly. Leila's hands tightened on the controls, calculating whether the damage was severe enough to prevent flight. 7 loaded, Fletcher's voice came through the crew compartment. 5 more coming. Another RPG. This one impacted the rocks beside the helicopter, the blast wave rocking Angel 7 sideways. Leila fought the controls, keeping the aircraft stable as more Rangers scrambled aboard. She could feel the helicopter growing heavier, the wounded and their equipment adding mass that would affect performance during the critical extraction climb. 11 loaded! 1 more! He's hit bad! Leila watched the fuel gauge and damage indicators, making rapid calculations. The tail rotor damage would affect maneuverability. The added weight would reduce climb performance. The storm would create unpredictable wind shear during the ascent. Every factor was stacking against them, creating a scenario where the margin for error had effectively disappeared. 12 aboard! Wounded secured! Get us out of here! Leila pulled maximum power, feeling Angel 7 strain against its own weight as it lifted off the canyon floor. Enemy fire intensified, rounds hammering into the aircraft's armored underside as she climbed. The damaged tail rotor created a vibration that ran through the entire airframe, threatening to shake the helicopter apart. Viper Actual, I need you and your men to shift your weight forward. We're tail heavy and I need to adjust our center of gravity. Copy, moving forward now. The helicopter climbed through the dust storm, Leila fighting constant wind shear while navigating the narrow canyon by instruments alone. The exit vector required threading between ridgelines with even less clearance than the entrance approach, and the damaged tail rotor meant I had reduced control authority. Warning alarms screamed as the helicopter's collision avoidance system detected terrain on all sides. Leila shut off the alarm, trusting her father's terrain data over the automated warnings. The Black Hawk climbed through the narrow corridor, rotors coming within feet of invisible rock walls, the entire aircraft shaking violently from turbulence and battle damage. And then they were clear, breaking through the ridgeline into open sky. The valley fell away behind them, enemy fire fading into the distance. Angel 7 was airborne, damaged, but flying, carrying 12 Rangers who would have died if she had followed orders and stayed on the ground. Viper Actual! Angel 7! Fletcher's voice was rough with emotion. I don't know how the hell you just did that, but you saved our lives! Every single one of us should be dead right now! Leila allowed herself a brief moment of relief before focusing on the next challenge, getting her damaged helicopter back to Bagram with 12 wounded men whose survival now depended entirely on her ability to keep Angel 7 in the air for the next 40 minutes.
The flight back to Bagram became a test of endurance as much as skill. Angel 7's damaged tail rotor created a constant vibration that intensified with each passing minute, and the warning indicators showed hydraulic pressure dropping in the aft flight control system. Leila had to compensate continuously, making constant adjustments to keep the helicopter stable while fighting wind shear from the ongoing dust storm. In the crew compartment behind her, Sergeant Fletcher and his Rangers were working frantically to stabilize their 3 critically wounded teammates. Through the internal communication system, Leila could hear their urgent conversations as they applied tourniquets, administered morphine, and tried to stop bleeding that threatened to become fatal before they reached medical facilities. Angel 7, how long to Bagram? Fletcher's voice was tight with stress. 35 minutes at current speed, Leila responded. How are your wounded? 2 are stable enough. Specialist Ruiz took shrapnel to the chest and he's losing blood fast. We need to get him to a trauma surgeon as soon as possible. Leila checked her instruments, calculating whether she could push Angel 7 harder despite the damage. The helicopter was already operating at the edge of its performance envelope, and increasing speed would put additional strain on the compromised tail rotor. But Specialist Ruiz didn't have 35 minutes. I'm going to increase speed. It's going to get rough back there. Make sure everyone's secured. Copy that. We're ready. Leila pushed the throttle forward, feeling the Black Hawk accelerate. The vibration from the damaged tail rotor immediately intensified, creating a shuddering that ran through the entire airframe. New warning indicators lit up on the instrument panel, showing stress levels approaching critical thresholds. She was flying the helicopter beyond its certified limits, gambling that the airframe would hold together long enough to reach base. The radio crackled with transmissions on the tower frequency. Leila had switched it back on, knowing she needed to coordinate her approach despite the consequences waiting for her on the ground. Bagram Tower, Angel 7, Major Ramsey is ordering you to divert to the auxiliary landing pad and shut down engines immediately upon arrival. Security forces will be waiting to take you into custody. Acknowledge. Bagram Tower, Angel 7, negative on auxiliary pad. I have 3 critical casualties requiring immediate trauma care. I'm landing at the medical facility helipad. Have surgical teams standing by. Angel 7, you are ordered to Bagram Tower. I have 12 Rangers aboard who will die if they don't receive immediate medical attention. You can arrest me after they're safe. Until then,
I'm landing where I need to land. Angel 7, out. Leila switched frequencies again, contacting the base medical operations directly. Bagram Medical, Angel 7 inbound with 12 casualties, 3 critical. Request trauma teams standing by at the helipad. ETA 28 minutes. Angel 7, Medical, we copy 12 casualties, 3 critical. Teams are being assembled now. Can you provide casualty details? Fletcher took over the communication, providing medical information on each wounded ranger, while Leila focused on keeping the increasingly unstable helicopter in the air. The tail rotor vibration had progressed from uncomfortable to dangerous, and she could feel the flight controls becoming less responsive with each passing minute. Through the dust storm, lights from Bagram Airfield began appearing in the distance. The base was a beacon of safety that seemed impossibly far away, despite being only minutes of flight time distant. Leila cross-checked her navigation system, calculating the most direct approach to the medical helipad while considering the helicopter's deteriorating condition. Angel 7, this is Captain Holloway on guard frequency. The unexpected transmission came through on the emergency channel. By launching to provide escort, Holloway was publicly associating himself with Leila's unauthorized mission. He was risking his own career to ensure she made it back safely. Angel 3, Angel 7, appreciate the offer, but I don't want you going down with me. I can make it from here.
-7, you don't get to make that decision. I'm establishing escort position off your port side. If that tail rotor fails, I need to be close enough to provide immediate assistance. Despite the stress and danger, Leila felt a surge of gratitude. Whatever consequences awaited her on the ground, at least one person believed what she had done was right. The Bagram Airfield grew larger in her canopy as she closed the distance. She could see emergency vehicles positioning around the medical helipad, their lights cutting through the dust storm. Surgical teams were assembling, ready to receive the casualties the moment the helicopter landed. Angel 7, Tower. Major Ramsey is on station at the medical helipad. He's ordered security forces to take you into custody the moment you shut down. Acknowledged, Tower. Tell the Major I'll be happy to discuss my career choices after my passengers receive medical care. The final approach to the helipad tested every skill Leila possessed. The damaged tail rotor made precise control nearly impossible, and the dust storm created wind shear that threatened to push the helicopter off course. She compensated constantly, fighting the controls while maintaining enough stability for a safe landing with critically wounded personnel aboard. Viper Actual, we're 60 seconds from touchdown. As soon as we're on the ground, get your wounded off as fast as possible. Medical teams are standing by. Roger 7, my men are ready to move. Leila descended toward the helipad, the landing spot marked by bright lights cutting through the dust. The helicopter shuddered violently as she reduced speed, the damaged tail rotor creating asymmetric forces that tried to spin the aircraft. She corrected with pedal inputs, using every bit of her skill to keep Angel 7 stable during the final moments of flight. The wheels touched down hard, the landing rougher than she would have liked, but successful. Leila immediately reduced power while keeping the rotors turning, providing rotor wash that would clear dust away from the medical teams rushing toward the aircraft. The crew doors flew open and Rangers began evacuating, carrying their wounded teammates toward waiting medical personnel. Stretchers appeared, trauma teams swarming around the casualties with practiced efficiency. Within 90 seconds, all 12 Rangers were off the helicopter and being rushed to the medical facility. Only then did Leila shut down Angel 7's engines. The rotors began spinning down, their whine decreasing gradually as the turbines cooled. Through the canopy, she could see Major Ramsey approaching, flanked by military police. His expression was thunderous, a mixture of fury and something else that might have been grudging respect. Leila removed her helmet and flight gloves, setting them carefully on the console. Her hands were steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through her system. She had completed the mission, brought 12 Rangers alive home, and proven that her father's techniques worked exactly as he had documented. Now she would face the consequences. As she climbed out of the cockpit, Leila's boots touched the tarmac and she stood at attention, waiting for Major Ramsey to reach her. Whatever happened next, she had no regrets. She had made the choice her father would have made, and 12 families would not be receiving death notifications because she had found the courage to act. The military police moved to either side of her, and Major Ramsey stopped directly in front, his face inches from hers. "Captain Leila Vance," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "You are under arrest for disobeying a direct order, unauthorized use of military equipment, and reckless endangerment. You will surrender your weapons and submit to custody immediately." Leila unbuckled her sidearm and handed it to one of the MPs, then held out her wrists for restraints. "Yes, sir," she said quietly. "I understand the charges." As the MP secured her wrists, Leila looked past Ramsey toward the medical facility where 12 Rangers were receiving the care that would save their lives. Whatever price she had to pay for that outcome was worth it.
The holding cell at Bagram was small and austere, containing only a metal cot, a small sink, and a toilet. Leila had been confined there for 18 hours, denied contact with anyone except the MPs who brought her meals. The isolation gave her time to process what had happened and prepare herself mentally for the court-martial proceedings that would inevitably follow. She didn't regret her decision. Every time doubt crept in, she thought about 12 Rangers who were alive because she had acted. That knowledge made the cell's concrete walls and uncertain future bearable. The sound of approaching footsteps broke the silence. The cell door opened to reveal Chief Warrant Officer Drake, accompanied by a female MP who remained at the door. "You have 15 minutes, Chief," the MP said. Drake nodded and entered, waiting until the door closed before speaking. "How are you holding up, Captain?" "I've been better, Chief, but I'm fine." "The Rangers you extracted are all going to survive. Specialist Ruiz required emergency surgery, but the trauma team got to him in time. The doctors said another 30 minutes and he would have bled out." Drake's weathered face showed approval. "You saved 12 lives, Vance. Whatever else happens, remember that." "Have they set a date for the court-martial?" "Not yet. There's been a development that's complicating things." Drake pulled a folded paper from her pocket. The Ranger team filed a formal commendation request. Sergeant Fletcher wrote a detailed account of the extraction, describing conditions that should have made helicopter operations impossible. He's requesting you receive the Distinguished Flying Cross for extraordinary heroism. Leila felt a mixture of emotions. Recognition for the mission meant nothing if she was being dishonorably discharged, but it did validate that what she had done was necessary and effective. "Major Ramsey won't let that go forward," Leila said. "I disobeyed his direct order. From his perspective, I'm insubordinate regardless of the outcome." Ramsey's perspective isn't the only one that matters anymore. Drake's expression shifted to something resembling satisfaction. "Your unauthorized flight was observed by multiple personnel, and word spread quickly about what you accomplished. By this morning, the story had reached regional command. By afternoon, it had reached the Pentagon." "I don't understand. Why would the Pentagon care about one unauthorized extraction?" "Because you flew a mission that every qualified pilot at this base said was impossible. You extracted 12 Rangers from a hot landing zone in zero visibility conditions with a damaged aircraft, using techniques that aren't in any standard operating procedure. The brass wants to know how you did it and whether those techniques can be taught to other pilots." The irony wasn't lost on Leila. She was facing court-martial for the same mission that had attracted high-level interest in her capabilities. The military's conflicting priorities were creating a situation where she was simultaneously a criminal and a valuable asset. "There's something else," Drake continued. "Captain Holloway provided his commanding officer with information about your father's research. The data card with advanced flight techniques, the terrain mapping, the weather penetration protocols. He argued that you weren't being reckless. You were applying documented methods that have been proven effective but never formally adopted." Holloway's going to get himself in trouble. He knows that. He's willing to accept the consequences because he believes your father's work deserves to be recognized, and because keeping you in a cell is a waste of exceptional talent. Listen to me, Vance. What happens in the next few days is going to determine not just your future, but potentially the future of tactical aviation doctrine.
There are people who want to crucify you as an example, but there are others who recognize that what you did represents innovation that could save countless lives. Before Leila could respond, the cell door opened again. This time, a full colonel in dress uniform entered, his chest bearing rows of decorations that indicated extensive combat experience. The MP stiffened to attention, and Drake immediately stood.
At ease, the colonel said. Chief Drake, thank you for your time with Captain Vance. I need to speak with her privately. Drake nodded and left, giving Leila one final look of encouragement before the door closed. The colonel studied Leila for a long moment before speaking. Captain Vance, I'm Colonel Victor Ashford, Commander of Aviation Operations for this sector. I've spent the last 6 hours reviewing every detail of your unauthorized flight, including data recovered from Angel 7's flight recorder, statements from the Ranger team, and weather records from last night. Yes, sir. I've also spent considerable time discussing the situation with Major Ramsey, who has made very clear his opinion that you should be court-martialed and dishonorably discharged. Ashford's expression was unreadable. He believes you represent exactly the kind of undisciplined pilot who endangers military operations by substituting personal judgment for proper command authority. Leila remains silent, knowing that anything she said would likely be used against her in proceedings. However, Ashford continued, I've also reviewed your father's service record and the data card containing his research. Colonel Graham Vance was one of the most innovative tactical aviators in modern military history. His techniques saved hundreds of lives during his career, even though they were never officially adopted, because they couldn't be standardized for average pilots. The colonel pulled out a tablet and brought up a 3-dimensional terrain map. The approach you used to enter the Tangi Valley shouldn't have been possible in those weather conditions. The extraction itself required precision that exceeds anything in our current training standards. And your emergency flight with a damaged aircraft demonstrated capabilities that suggest training far beyond what conventional programs provide. My father taught me techniques he developed over 30 years of combat flying, sir. I applied those techniques to a tactical situation where conventional approaches had failed. That's exactly my point, Captain. You possess knowledge and skills that could revolutionize how we train tactical pilots. The question is whether we're going to throw away that potential by court-martialing you, or whether we're going to find a way to harness it for the benefit of the entire aviation community. Leila felt hope stirring, despite her effort to maintain emotional control. What are you suggesting, sir? I'm suggesting that there might be an alternative to court-martial. One that acknowledges you violated orders while also recognizing the value of what you accomplished. Ashford's expression became more serious. But that alternative would require you to do something that might be harder than facing military justice. You would need to work with people like Major Ramsey, earn their trust, and prove that your father's techniques can be taught safely and effectively to other pilots. You're offering me a chance to stay in the military? I'm offering you a chance to honor your father's legacy by ensuring his innovations become part of how we train the next generation of pilots. But it won't be easy, and it will require humility, patience, and the ability to work within a system that's naturally resistant to change. Leila thought about her father's journal, the techniques he had spent decades developing, and the potential impact if those methods could be shared with pilots who desperately needed them. She thought about the 12 Rangers whose lives had been saved because she knew how to fly missions that others considered impossible. I'll do whatever it takes, sir, she said finally. If there's a way to make sure other pilots have access to these techniques, I want to be part of making that happen. Colonel Ashford nodded slowly. Then we have a lot of work ahead of us, Captain. Starting with convincing Major Ramsey that keeping you in uniform serves the military's interests better than putting you in prison.
2 weeks after her unauthorized extraction mission, Leila stood in a briefing room filled with the aviation unit's most experienced pilots. Major Ramsey sat in the front row, his expression skeptical but no longer openly hostile. Colonel Ashford had arranged this demonstration as part of the agreement that had kept Leila out of court-martial proceedings. She would have one chance to prove that her father's techniques were teachable and valuable enough to justify overlooking her insubordination. "Gentlemen," Ashford began, addressing the assembled pilots, "Captain Vance has been given the opportunity to present the flight methods she used during the Tangi Valley extraction. These techniques were developed by her father, Colonel Graham Vance, and represent innovations that go beyond current tactical aviation doctrine." Leila stepped forward, connecting her tablet to the briefing room's display system. Her father's detailed terrain maps appeared on the screen, showing the micro-corridors through the mountain ridge lines that she had used during the rescue. "The key principle behind these techniques," Leila explained, "is understanding that terrain and weather aren't absolute barriers. They're dynamic variables that can be navigated with sufficient data and precision. Standard doctrine treats low visibility conditions and confined terrain as mission prohibitive because conventional navigation systems lack the resolution necessary for safe operations." She brought up the three-dimensional mapping overlay that had guided her through the dust storm. "My father spent years documenting terrain features at a level of detail that standard military mapping doesn't capture. These micro-terrain maps show natural corridors, wind patterns, and approach vectors that become visible only when you have centimeter-level accuracy in your navigation data." Captain Andre Sullivan, one of the senior pilots, raised his hand. "Captain Vance, even with detailed mapping, flying through zero visibility conditions requires trusting instruments completely. Most pilots aren't trained to operate with that level of instrument dependence, especially in combat situations where stress affects judgment." "You're absolutely right," Leila acknowledged. "That's why my father developed specific cognitive training protocols to build the neural pathways necessary for instrument-dependent flight. It's not just about trusting your instruments, it's about processing instrument data so efficiently that your responses become automatic, removing the cognitive load that causes stress-induced errors." She walked them through the training methodology, explaining exercises that compressed years of instrument flight development into months of focused practice. The techniques required discipline and intensive repetition, but the results were pilots who could operate in conditions that would ground conventionally trained aviators. Major Ramsey spoke for the first time since the briefing began. "Captain, everything you're describing sounds impressive in theory, but the Tangi Valley extraction was one successful mission. How do we know these techniques are reliable enough to base training doctrine on them?" Leila had anticipated this question. She brought up mission logs from her father's final deployment. Colonel Vance flew 47 missions using these techniques over a 6-month period. Every mission succeeded without incident. He extracted personnel from locations that had been declared impossible for helicopter operations. He delivered supplies to outposts that were considered unreachable by conventional means. The success rate speaks for itself. "Your father was an exceptional pilot," Ramsey countered. "Perhaps these techniques worked for him because of innate abilities that can't be taught. How do we know average pilots can learn them?" "Because he taught them to me," Leila said simply. "I wasn't born with exceptional abilities, Major. I had to work for every skill I possess. My father designed these training methods specifically to be teachable to pilots who have the discipline to master them. I'm living proof that they work." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. If Leila could learn techniques that enabled missions like the Tangi Valley extraction, then other pilots could potentially learn them as well. The question wasn't whether the methods worked, but whether the military was willing to invest in the training required to implement them.
Colonel Ashford stood. "I've made arrangements for a practical demonstration. Tomorrow morning, we'll conduct a simulated extraction mission under conditions similar to what Captain Vance faced during the Ranger rescue. She'll fly the mission while we observe and evaluate her techniques in real time. If successful, we'll move forward with pilot testing of her training methodology.
The briefing concluded with mixed reactions from the assembled pilots. Some were openly skeptical, believing that Leila's successful mission had been as much luck as skill. Others showed cautious interest, recognizing that innovations in tactical aviation could provide significant operational advantages. As pilots filed out, Sergeant Dominic Fletcher entered the room. The Ranger team leader had been released from medical observation the previous day and had requested permission to attend Leila's briefing. His presence was a powerful reminder of what was at stake. "Captain Vance," Fletcher said, approaching her as the room emptied, "I wanted to thank you personally. My Rangers and I are alive because you had the courage to do what others said was impossible. Whatever these pilots decide about your techniques, know that 12 families have their loved ones home because of your skill and bravery." "You're welcome, Sergeant. I'm glad everyone made it." "There's something else." Fletcher pulled out a letter. "This is from Specialist Ruiz's daughter. She's 8 years old. She wanted me to give you this." Leila unfolded the letter, seeing a child's handwriting accompanied by a crayon drawing of a helicopter. "Thank you for saving my daddy. He says you're a hero. I think so too." The simple words hit Leila harder than any military commendation could have. This wasn't about proving herself or honoring her father's legacy. It was about a little girl who still had her father because someone had been willing to take risks that mattered. "Tell her she's welcome," Leila said, her voice tight with emotion. "And tell her father he's the real hero for serving his country." That evening, Leila prepared for the next day's demonstration flight. She reviewed her father's notes, ran through mental rehearsals of the approach sequences, and checked Angel 7's maintenance status. Chief Drake had overseen repairs to the damaged tail rotor, ensuring the helicopter was fully operational for the evaluation mission. Captain Holloway found her in the hangar as darkness fell. "Nervous about tomorrow?" "Terrified," Leila admitted. "Everything depends on this demonstration. If I fail, it validates everyone who says these techniques are too dangerous. If I succeed, I have a chance to change how we train tactical pilots." "Your father faced similar pressure when he first developed these methods. People told him he was reckless, that his techniques would get people killed. He proved them wrong by succeeding consistently under impossible conditions. You've already proven you can do this, Leila. Tomorrow is just about showing others what you're capable of." "What if they still don't believe it? What if they see the demonstration and decide it's not worth the risk to change doctrine?" "Then you keep pushing. You keep proving that innovation matters more than tradition. Eventually, results speak louder than skepticism." Holloway placed a hand on her shoulder. "Your father didn't give up when people doubted him. Neither should you." As Holloway left, Leila stood alone in the hangar beside Angel 7. The helicopter that had carried 12 Rangers to safety now sat ready for another mission, one that would determine whether her father's life work would be recognized or dismissed. She thought about the little girl's letter, about 12 families who had been spared the worst news imaginable, and about all the future missions where these techniques could mean the difference between success and failure, between life and death. Leila applied her father's worn leather jacket like armor, feeling his presence in the familiar weight on her shoulders. She was ready for whatever tomorrow would bring.
The demonstration flight took place at dawn, with observers positioned at multiple vantage points around the simulated extraction zone. Colonel Ashford had recreated conditions similar to the Tongi Valley rescue: confined terrain, simulated zero visibility through electronic interference with standard navigation systems, and a timed extraction requirement that matched the urgency Leila had faced during the actual mission. Major Ramsey stood in the observation tower beside Ashford, watching as Leila performed her pre-flight checks on Angel 7. His skepticism hadn't disappeared, but there was something different in his expression now. Perhaps it was grudging curiosity about whether she could replicate her success under controlled conditions. "Angel 7, you are cleared for demonstration flight," the tower controller announced. "Simulated mission parameters are active. Your objective is to navigate to the extraction point using only the terrain mapping and instrument systems, extract simulated casualties under time pressure, and return to base. Standard navigation aids are disabled to replicate zero visibility conditions." Leila lifted off smoothly, feeling Angel 7 respond perfectly to her inputs. The repairs Chief Drake had supervised were flawless, and the helicopter handled like new. As she climbed away from the airfield, the electronic interference activated, turning her canopy windows into blank screens that simulated the dust storm conditions she had flown through 2 weeks earlier.
But this time, she wasn't flying in desperation with lives hanging in the balance. This time, she was demonstrating that her father's techniques were reliable, repeatable, and teachable to other pilots who possessed the discipline to master them. The approach to the simulated extraction zone required threading through narrow corridors between terrain features, all navigated purely by instruments and the detailed mapping her father had developed. Leila's hands moved smoothly on the controls, her mind processing the three-dimensional terrain data automatically, while making constant micro-adjustments for simulated wind conditions. In the observation tower, pilots watched her progress on tracking displays that showed Angel 7's position relative to the surrounding terrain. The margins were impossibly tight, with clearances measured in feet rather than the hundreds of yards that conventional doctrine required. Several pilots exchanged glances, recognizing that what they were witnessing went far beyond standard flight training. Leila reached the extraction point exactly on schedule, descended to the simulated landing zone, and held position while dummy casualties were loaded. Then she executed the extraction climb through the same narrow corridor she had used on approach, demonstrating that the techniques worked in both directions with equal effectiveness. The entire demonstration took 19 minutes. When Angel 7 touched down back at Bagram, Leila shut down the engines and climbed out to find a crowd of pilots waiting. Their expressions had transformed from skepticism to something approaching awe. Colonel Ashford approached first. "Captain Vance, that was the most impressive demonstration of tactical flying I've witnessed in 30 years of service. You just proved that your father's techniques aren't theoretical innovations. They're practical methods that work exactly as documented." Major Ramsey was slower to approach, his face showing the internal struggle of a man forced to reconsider strongly held beliefs. When he finally spoke, his tone was professional, but lacking its previous hostility. "Captain, I owe you an apology. When you requested permission to fly the Ranger extraction, I dismissed your capabilities based on assumptions that were clearly wrong. You've demonstrated skills that exceed anything in our current training standards, and you did so while maintaining safety margins that prove these techniques are sound." The apology was significant, representing a shift in Ramsey's perspective that would have been unthinkable 2 weeks earlier. Leila met his gaze steadily. "Thank you, sir. I understand your concerns were based on legitimate safety considerations. My goal has never been to prove anyone wrong. It's been to ensure that my father's innovations reach the pilots who need them."
The following weeks brought rapid changes. Colonel Ashford authorized the development of an advanced tactical flight program based on Graham Vance's techniques. Leila was appointed as the lead instructor, working with a team that included Holloway, Drake, and eventually even Ramsey, whose expertise in flight safety protocols proved valuable in ensuring the new methods could be taught safely. The program started with a small group of hand-selected pilots who demonstrated the discipline and aptitude necessary for advanced training. The results exceeded expectations. Within 3 months, graduates were flying missions that had previously been considered impossible, extracting personnel from locations that conventional doctrine had written off as unreachable. 6 months after the Tangi Valley rescue, Leila stood at the Pentagon delivering a briefing to senior military leadership about the Advanced Tactical Flight Program's results. The statistics were compelling. Mission success rates had improved by 40%. Operator casualty rates had dropped by 35%, and capabilities had expanded to include operations in conditions that would have grounded entire aviation units under previous doctrine. But the moment that meant the most to Leila came after the formal briefing, when a general who had served with her father approached her privately. "Colonel Vance would be proud of what you've accomplished," he said. "He spent his career trying to get these techniques adopted and faced resistance at every turn. You succeeded where he couldn't, not because your methods are better, but because you had the courage to prove they worked when it mattered most." "I had everything I needed to succeed, sir. I just had to find the courage to use it." "That's the hardest part, Captain. Anyone can possess knowledge. It takes something special to apply that knowledge when the consequences of failure are severe." That evening, Leila returned to recorders and opened her father's journal one final time. She had read every page dozens of times, absorbed every lesson, internalized every technique. But now, as she turned to the final entry, she saw something she had missed before,
A note written in the margin in handwriting that seemed less steady than her father's usual precise script. Leila, if you're reading this far, then you found your way to the missions that matter. Remember that legacy isn't about reputation or recognition. It's about making the world better for the people who come after you. Every pilot you train, every life you save, every impossible mission you make possible. That's the legacy that counts. I love you, and I'm proud of the pilot and person you've become. Your father. Leila closed the journal carefully, feeling tears she had held back for months finally flowing freely. Her father had known she would succeed, had believed in her abilities even when she doubted herself, and had prepared her for exactly the path she now walked. The Rangers she had rescued were home with their families. The pilots she was training were developing skills that would save countless lives in future operations. Her father's techniques were becoming standard doctrine, ensuring that his innovations would benefit generations of aviators and the people they served. The leather jacket hung on a hook beside her desk, worn and weathered, but still carrying the scent of aviation fuel and old leather. She had earned the right to wear it now, not as her father's daughter, but as a pilot who had proven that excellence required courage, innovation demanded risk, and sometimes the greatest achievements came from challenging the boundaries that others accepted as unchangeable. 12 Rangers were surrounded, ammunition running low, facing death in a mountain valley far from home. A mystery pilot had responded to their final transmission, flying a mission that others called impossible, and brought them home safely. That pilot was no longer a mystery. She was Captain Leila Shadow Vance, and she was just getting started.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.